this morning, what we will do this morning is, I would like to say a few words, and then we will have what we call a purification ceremony. And if you remember yesterday, I asked you to think of two things and to write them on a piece of paper. And in case you did not, somebody, Shamani here, is passing around little pieces of paper. But if you did, and you don't want to have a big piece of paper, because we're going to burn this in this little pot right there. So if it's something large, it's not going to work. So if it is large, summarize it on this little one. And the two things that I asked you to consider and think about are, one, remember we spoke about obstacles. Our theme this week is receiving guidance. And to receive guidance, we wish to open our hearts. We have to unbind it. If our cup is pointed down, we may want guidance, but we can't receive that guidance because it's blocked. Or if the doors are closed, the visitor can't enter, the guest can't enter. So it is with us. What are those things? And think of one, two, perhaps, that might be a block that wonderful to just let it go. And conversely, or you can approach it from the other way, or perhaps from both if you wish. What might be those things that we want to put that same thing in a positive way, in a positive affirmation, in whatever it might be. And usually a positive affirmation is something we want to emphasize more than the negative, because if we go about our life saying, I don't want to be this, I don't want to be that, I don't want to be that, well, we're just continually reminding ourselves of those things that we don't want to be, and we reinforce that a little bit. So you better to think about it in a positive way. But whichever is striking for you, do that, and write that very simply as a word or two, a few words on a piece of paper. And then we're going to have, what we will do is during this ceremony, we invite you to come up. Now, this is totally optional. If you don't feel to, that's perfectly fine too. But come up, and I've asked Nayaswami Surendra and Tushti to help me here today, since we have a number of people we don't want to take a super long time. So we'll have the three of us here. Come up to one of us, and you can kneel before us, and we'll have a chair here. This chair at the side here, kneeling sometimes for some people who have injuries, it's not comfortable. You can sit in the chair and say the words that are printed on the little piece of paper there. It says, I seek purification by the grace of God. And I'm going to explain that a little bit. But say those words, I seek purification by the grace of God. At that point, and then whoever one of us sitting here will pray with you silently. Mentally you pray to overcome whatever that obstacle is, or to affirm that, strengthen that affirmation that you are making, and pray for that. Pray that God come and fill your heart and give you that strength, and then we will pray with you. And then after praying a little bit, we'll place our finger here on the heart, over the heart center, asking mentally, God bless you, giving you a blessing at that point. And then we will also say the words, the Master says, open your heart to me and I'll enter and take charge of your life. And then when we complete, we'll say, by the grace of the Masters, you are free. Now when we say the words, you say the words, I seek purification by the grace of God. We say, the Master says, open your heart to me and I will enter, take charge of your life. What you have to remember, God works in this world with instruments. So it's God that is saying those words. And we're repeating that affirmation of the divine. The Master says, I will enter and take charge of your life. But let's say in this case, the master's acting as the instrument. And if you're a disciple of this path, you can think of the masters of this path. If you're a disciple of another path, think of your own line of gurus. If you're a disciple of no path, just think of divine guidance itself. Because all masters, all saints, act as instruments, channels for the divine. There's no personal will involved in that. Now this ceremony comes from, it was written by Swami Kriyananda, and the words derive a little bit from an incident in the life of Paramahansa Yogananda when he went to the United States, 1920. His first disciple in America was a doctor, dentist, and Dr. Lewis was his name. That's good. I think that's good. Are you changing it as I'm speaking, or I see your finger going up? Oh, you're changing it for the rain. I see what it is. Okay. So Dr. Lewis was his first disciple, and Dr. Lewis went to him without having met him before. He just went to Yogananda and asked him for some guidance, answer to certain questions that he had as an interview. But before Yogananda would answer him, Yogananda recognized him as a disciple in the past, and God had sent him to him.
Can you just go a little closer to the mic? Because
Well, see, if I go closer, then it starts to squeal.
I'll manage that.
Oh, okay. And then, okay, good.
Yeah, because I'm not very good quality mic.
I was backing up because I didn't want it to.
Sorry.
Okay. So he went to Dr. Lewis went to Yogananda and asked him this question, and Yogananda asked him an unexpected question in return, and he asked him. He said, "Well, will you love me as I love you?" Now that's a strange question to receive when you first meet somebody. But nevertheless, and so Dr. Lewis, not knowing quite what to say at that point, but then he thought he saw in Master's eyes, Yogananda's eyes, he saw that something there. He said yes. He said yes. And Yogananda then rubbed his hands like this. He says, "Good. Now I can take charge of your life." And at first meeting, this was Dr. Lewis, accepted this. So, the implication there is when he opened his heart to Yogananda in this case, Dr. Lewis opened his heart. He says, "Open your heart to me, and then I will enter. I can now enter. Now I can take charge of your life." And in the sense, what we're saying in this ceremony, but also this is symbolic of our approach to life, is open your heart to the divine, and the divine then can enter in and take charge of our life. Now, that may sound frightening to some people. "Oh, I don't take charge of our life." But the devotee is asking the divine to take charge so that we become instruments of the divine. It's God working through us. And as we'll explain a little bit further today after the ceremony, the spiritual path is one of learning to give up self-will and substitute it for becoming an instrument for divine will through us. Now, that has implications, which I won't take time right now. Later, I'll explain. So this is what we're doing symbolically through this. And so whatever it is that you have that perhaps you would like to affirm, to make that heart open to be able to receive divine guidance and to act in attunement with that. Because when we do, then we find that life effortlessly, it's an effortless ease, you could say, is our life, rather than the constant struggle that sometimes it seems to be. It's because there's obstacles there. And if we remove those obstacles, ease begins to take its place. So with that, we're going to begin. There is an oft-told story from the Bible that I too would like to repeat. Jesus was walking in a village and surrounded by a crowd of people who would be attracted naturally whenever a holy man comes to a town. People would flock to him. And as he was walking through this crowd of people, a very dense crowd of people, and as you can imagine, a crowd of people were jostling up against him and so forth, and he was making his way through the crowd, he stopped and he said, "Who touched me? I felt power going out from me. Somebody touched me." Now, the disciples, I imagine the disciples hearing that would have said, "Well, sir, many people have touched you. You've been in this crowd, and it's inevitable that people would touch you." But he was, although many people were touching him, power was not going out from him when everybody touched him. And there was one lady on the roadside who meekly, when he kept inquiring, "Who touched me?" she came forward and said, "Sir, it was I." She had been kneeling on the roadside. And as he passed, she reached out and touched the hem of his garment because she was praying for a blessing, a healing for somebody that she was, not for herself, but for another person, perhaps a child, I don't remember. Is it a child?
For herself.
It was for her health.
Yeah.
It was for her health. Okay, she was praying for a blessing of healing. And in that devotion, touched the hem of his garment. And when she confessed that it was her, and he said by her faith, she would receive that healing. Because of her faith, she had drawn that blessing to herself, and so it came to pass. Now, many people were probably, I would imagine, there were many people seeking blessings, there were many people touching him, but the power went out from him because of her ability to draw that blessing through that channel, and she was healed by her faith. Now, the other part of that I thought of that story is because we were yesterday speaking about miracles and things of such nature that are affected through the instrument of a master, and that the master is not consciously thinking about these things. That is, I would assume, at least my human mind tends to think that, although perhaps on some larger frame of awareness, superconscious awareness, there is some awareness there. But the masters find that their presence affects miracles around them. Things happen. And Swami Kriyananda said that in Yogananda's presence, things just happened. Miracles happened without any fanfare or any to-do about that. Things just happened. Things went rightly. And you find that this is the case of a person that's in tune with God, a person who's an instrument of God, that somehow their actions are in tune with the divine will, and things happen. There was a story also in Yogananda's life that when he came back in 1935, he was in Serampore, and he went by the house of a relative of his, and there was lamentation coming from the house because somebody had died there, and a relative of his. And so he heard this, and he went inside and sat beside, just asked to be alone with that person, and sat beside him. And that person was revived, came back. And Master, just his prayer, just in his presence, asking God for the healing of this person. And it reminds me, too, in the same story in Christ's life. He came into the village, there was lamentation. Lazarus, who happened to be a distant relative, just as very similar to this story, very distant wailing of the relatives. And he went to the tomb where Lazarus was and called to the tomb. He had been dead now some days. Lazarus, come out of the tomb. And Lazarus came out of the tomb, swathed in those things that they wrapped the body in. Well, how does this happen? And it's not so much the master is thinking, this thing happened, that thing happened. And when he told that story to the disciples, Yogananda told that story to the disciples, Dr. Lewis asked him, "Sir, did you go in, did you resurrect that relative? Was it God who told you to do that?" And Yogananda said, "Oh, yes." He says, "I would not do anything unless it was God's will for that to happen, because he was an instrument of God's will." Now, the interesting thing that he also went on to explain, and Swami went on to explain in relating this story at one time or another, that this is the duty, you could say, or of why the masters come, that we all should act in this way, as to the degree that we can. But of course, we're not perfect channels like the master, but yet it's still our duty, and this is how we act in life, that we too, in whatever limited capacity we have, act as an instrument for the divine, for blessings to other people. And you can see this in just simple ways. My wife, Sadhana Devi, who's coming, by the way, to here in a couple of weeks. She worked some years ago in a fire department that was local to the Nanda village, not too far from there. And she worked in this village local fire department. And it so happened, and maybe this is the case for many places like this, they were all volunteers. And they were all very dedicated to what they were doing. But of course, they each had their own idea of how it ought to be done, the job ought to be done. But they did have a captain who was in charge and sub-captains. But there was much bickering always in that department. People would argue all the time in there. And so she was hired to be the office person in charge of the office. So she went there 2-3 days a week and worked in the office. And the fire department had this interesting thing happen, is that after a period of time, when Sadhana would come into the office, nobody would argue. And not that she had, she's a very gentle, sweet person, and so it's not she would tell anybody not to argue, but they just would not argue when she was there. Perhaps out of respect, I'm not quite sure why, but there was calm. There was calm. And so she worked there for 5 years. And everything was calm, at least during the day while she was there. They were very calm. When she left after 5 years, life changed. And then, of course, it reverted back to the way it was before. They would bicker. Because now we have an influence. Each of us have an influence. I saw this in Swami Kriyananda's life. In his presence, things seem to work differently than in other situations. And each of us in that way, we're not consciously, the Sadhana Devi wasn't consciously enforcing calmness on the situation, but it happened in her order there. People respected that. Each of us are in the same way, and the masters do this at even a higher degree. Somehow, in their presence, things happen. The story that also comes to mind is Yoganandaji was, when he was in Calcutta at 35, 36, he was leaving the city, going some other place. And as he was leaving, he was there at Howard Station there, and as he was leaving, people came and they wanted to see him off. And so as he was offering a blessing to this person, blessing, but the crowd was always there. People were coming, blessings, blessings, blessings. Well, it was time for the train to leave. And so the train was so at such a time, train leaves, train's going to leave. So the train started to leave, started up its engine, and it's going. But what happened was the train was leaving and the wheels started turning, but they couldn't gain traction. The wheels started spinning, and they were spinning and spinning, and the train was time for the train to leave. I imagine it was tooting its horn, and so on, but it wasn't moving. And Yogananda was there blessing people, and the conductor came out, the station master came out, they went and inspected the engine, and looked at it to figure out the engineer. They were looking at it, this isn't going. And then finally one of the either conductor station noticed down there was this holy man there blessing people. So he went up to Master and he says, "Oh, holy man, please get on the train. It's time for the train to leave. Would you please get on the train?" And he did. He got on the train and away it went. But I thought that was a nice story because, one, it illustrates the point I'm making here. But I thought that's nice that that's a culture that recognizes that the holy man was. I thought that pleased me. Also, just thinking that story. Many countries you wouldn't. That wouldn't be the response. It wouldn't occur. That might be the situations. That was sweet. But and away it went. But you find that when things in the presence of a divine presence, of a divine instrument, of which each of us are potentially also acting in that way. It's our duty to rise ourselves up. Yogananda, the Masters, Christ, all of these, they come not to demonstrate to us what they can do. They have this power, that power, or another, but that's not their role to demonstrate that. Their role is to inspire us to become like that. And in silent, mysterious ways, as we become channels ourselves for the divine, we find that somehow things start to go right for ourselves and also for the situation, because we're in the social situation. Things start to go better, put it that way. They go better around us to the degree that we can be that channel, because the magnetism that what flows through influences. Now, the greatest obstacle, you could say, for us being that way is, or you could say our need is to overcome this issue of self-will. We act as self-will. Now, that can be interpreted and needs to be a little bit explained, because self-will is something that, yes, we want to develop our willpower. We start off this teachings of self-realization with the energization exercises, and when we speak about the energization exercises, we speak about their physical benefits and so on. But somewhere in the course, we also say that the energization exercises are exercises to develop our willpower. And Paramahansa Yogananda made a very strong emphasis on the need for us to develop will, to be able to act, to do, to apply our will to whatever it is we do. I will, and so on. And then, so this is a key element in every action that we take. Even breath, although it seems to be somewhat unconscious, there is a seed of will, even in the breath, those things that seemingly are out of our control. So yes, we want to develop the will, but the essence of the spiritual path is learning to have that will guided by the proper source. If that will is egoically directed, if the will is strictly a function of my individual likes and dislikes and preferences, that certainly will take us to a certain degree. As we said yesterday, that separates us from the animals. But if it's an intermediate step, we need to take it beyond that. We need to have that will, attune that will to something higher beyond our own individual ego. And that is the spiritual path right there. learning to take the will, use the will, develop the will, and then realize just acting from my own likes and dislikes and desires is not taking me to what I really want. I need to have something more. And then we learn what might that be, and we learn to attune that will to something beyond ourselves, a divine source. Yogananda, in the autobiography of a yogi, says, when I came to my master, my will was guided by whims and fancies. It was only when I learned to attune my individual will to my guru's wisdom-guided will that I found freedom. And so he came guided by whims and fancies. And I think we all know what whims and fancies are. Our will is guided by that. But the ability to then give up those whims and fancies by attuning to something else, something higher, then we find freedom. Freedom is not doing what we want to do. I'm free to engage in whatever bad habit I choose. That's my freedom. And yes, it's true. We have that freedom to exert our will in one way or another, but that doesn't give us freedom, because we engage in those things and we become bound by them. They become habits. We find that they begin to control us. And we lose, in the expression of our free will in those sorts of things, we lose it. And we sacrifice our will to be able to do something with our free will. So that's not just engaging in whims and fancies. So when we hear people say, well, I need to develop my will rather than tune my will to something outside of myself, it's maybe at a certain level that might be true. But a wise person gets, when they evolve to the point of wanting freedom, when they evolve true freedom, when they evolve to the point of wanting God, when they evolve to the point where they want bliss, then they realize that that is limited and it will not give them what they want. We have to be able to give up that little will, those whims and fancies, to be able to attune it with something more than that. But this is not something that's easily learned. This is something that it takes a great deal of time and effort, and usually a great deal of stumbling and failure as well, because we learn through our mistakes. And so mistakes in life are perfectly fine if we learn the lesson that comes from them. Paramahansa Yogananda, when he first met Swami Kriyananda, when Swami first met when Paramahansa Yogananda, he came to him, and I mentioned yesterday, I think I did, that Yogananda asked him, will you give me your unconditional obedience? After he asked him if you'd give him his unconditional love. And first, Yogananda, Swamiji said, yes, for your love, yes. The obedience, he hesitated. He says, what if I think that you're wrong? And Yogananda said, I will never ask anything of you that God doesn't direct me to ask of you. And in that case, he gave his obedience to Yogananda. And from there forward, he always tried to reference everything back. If he wasn't sure, what did Master say? What did Master want? What did he do? What is that confirmed by what he said? And if it wasn't, then he wouldn't accept it. But if it was, then he would accept it. But there was another disciple in the first there was a lady disciple that she was in there, and I think it was Sister Gyanamanta, that she would always do whatever Yogananda wanted. He would have the slightest desire for something, and she was immediately. That was her one sadhana of more than anything else in life, was to attune herself to Yogananda's will. And she'd run here, there, and whatever to do the slightest thing. And finally, when some of the younger nuns asked her, he says, why are you always doing every little thing that he says? You know, that why are you always running and doing everything like that? And why don't you think of yourself a little bit for your own needs? Because you're old and you're infirm. And they were I suspect they were trying to say it in a nice way, but I'm saying it maybe a little more harshly than they did. But her answer to them was, he says, well, you see, this is how I've been serving my guru, and I'm a little bit old now, too old now to change. And so I think I'll continue to do it in this way. And it's giving me happiness up to this point. I'm too old now to change. And so she continued on with that way. But what I was going to mention is there's another disciple, and a young man, that Swami, a fellow disciple. And Swamiji was saying how he always tried to do Master's will, and whatever that might be. And another disciple said, why? I don't really believe in doing everything that, following Master's will. I think I should also do my will, also, because I think I need to develop my own will. And that seems to me that each of us need to be strong in our own will, and so I want to do my will, rather than not so much Yogananda's will. And of course, then Yogananda, hearing about this later, scoffed at the folly of this disciple, not wanting to do his own will. And the reference here, of course, is when we want to do our own will, we tend to follow our whims and fancies, because our own will is not refined. Our own will is not attuned to higher wisdom. And to the degree that we insist upon our own will without reference to trying to draw guidance, we find that we will be led astray one way or the other. We need to be able to attune to that divine will. And this subject that we're talking about this weekend is how to draw that guidance so that we are guided by the divine will. Now, if we had, such as Swamiji at that time, he had a God-realized guru right there saying, do this, do that, do the other thing, perhaps that would be easy. Although it wasn't easy, actually. What Swami says, that wasn't easy, because oftentimes Yogananda wouldn't say so much, do this, do that, do the other thing. He required and expected the disciple to attune themselves to his will, to attune themselves, to intuit with the intuition, to understand and put oneself into attunement with that, so that it wasn't an intellectual exercise, but it was from inward attunement that one put oneself in attunement with that and drew that guidance. So even for us today, whether we're disciples of Yogananda after all these years, or whether we're disciples of some other path, we don't always have that luxury of having that somebody physically just saying, do this, do that. And that's not what the Master really, how they teach. They teach often silently. Many gurus don't say a word. They don't say a word. I remember there was a story of Sadashiv. Sadashiv, South India, he was silent. He didn't say, he was actually, the story goes, I digress, he was a very intelligent young scholar, debater, Sanskrit, the scriptures, and he could beat anybody in debate. And one day he met some other scholars, elderly scholars, and he challenged them to a debate, and you might say just intellectually bested them very easily. And he was a little bit proud of it. He was a little bit, because he was proud of his intellectuality. And his guru admonished him. He says, when will you learn to hold your tongue? And Sadashiv, now he was a great man too, though. Although he had that little bit of pride, he said, by your grace, Master, instantly. And he was silent for the rest of his life. Never said another word. Now that is following the Guru's. but he asked, by your grace. And I'm sure if his guru had said otherwise, he wouldn't have done that. He says, "Well, you're great." So he was silent. But a certain incident happened, and a high-ranking person asked his advice about something, and he wrote in the sand, when you learn not to do that which you want, you will then be able to do that which you like. And I remember Swami saying that, he says, now that's good advice if you think about it, but when you learn not to always do what you want, you'll then learn to do what you like. Now, we also talk about likes and dislikes, but then put that aside for the moment. I think what he was trying to say is, give up those desires and just doing what I want to do, and at the same time attune yourself to something higher. Now, how do we do that? We're in a situation where perhaps we don't have somebody giving us advice, it's doing it this way, doing it that way. But if we want to do God's will, what that means is we need to attune ourselves to God's vibration. And if we attune ourselves to God's vibration so that we become an instrument for the divine acting through us, we find that somehow, again, things work rightly. Now, yesterday I mentioned this a little bit, but this is an example. If we attune ourselves to divine bliss, let's say, if we attune ourselves to joy, or if you take this, this little example of Sadhana Devi, she happened to be calm. If you attune yourselves to calmness, divine, which is a divine quality, attune yourself perfectly to that, you begin to find that things you're in bliss, you're in God. If you're perfectly attuned to God's bliss, you are in bliss. God is with you. You are then a channel for God. So if we're asking for guidance, what our task before us is to attune ourselves with those divine states. Invite God into our lives as joy, as peace, and be an expression of that which flows through you. Allow it to flow through you, and suddenly you find that things begin to work. Not that you have to think about it, but it naturally, without even perhaps your knowledge, things begin to work in your favor. You don't have to think, oh, I am going to go heal somebody. I just think, oh, which person should I heal today? I'm sure that the masters, they're not thinking like that. Which ones? They just naturally, circumstances make so that it happens. That happens. And we can be that way too in our own limited degree. Because it's not either or, it's the degree by which the divine is flowing through us that affects this around us. And our life then becomes blessed in the process. So we have to be instruments of these things. And in that, the guidance will come suddenly, and we'll find ourselves making the right step at the right time. Like some of the story, I don't remember the story yesterday. All of a sudden, the cell phone story was good. It happens. It happens naturally. Now, some practical advice, though, because this is I'm speaking more in terms of an ideal than day-to-day life presents us. It doesn't always present ideal situations. But taking this, if you want to, you're seeking guidance, and we know, okay, I want to allow a divine to flow through me, and I'll find that the right guidance will come. So if you want to make an action, probably the simplest piece of advice to give somebody, if you are making a decision in your life that is important for you, what attitude or what vibration do you want to have flowing through you at the time you're making that decision? I'm going to ask somebody, I'll ask suggestions. What would you want to be flowing through you at the time when you're making the decision? Or maybe I'll ask it the other way around. What don't you want flowing through you when you're making an important decision?
Restless.
Okay, restlessness might be one thing. I think let's think something a little bit more oomph than that.
Excitement.
Anxiety,
Anger?
anger. Now that's the one I was looking for, actually. That's a little bit more, because restlessness, yes. I mean, it's a good answer, but not as. Do you want to make a decision in the state of anger? You can. But what sort of guidance are you going to attract to yourself when you're angry? And what would happen if you have an important decision to make and you're furious?
Wrong decisions. All wrong decisions.
You're going to attract a certain thoughts. Remember we talked about the radio? What station are we attuning ourselves to? Thoughts we draw. We draw guidance to us according to the frequency, you might say, of our radio antenna. And we draw those thoughts. Thoughts are universally rooted, not individually rooted. So we begin to draw inspiration according to the type of energy that is flowing through us. So if we have artistic energy flowing through us, Swami was a musician, composer, and he would be thinking about, I remember when he took a pilgrimage to Egypt, he came back and he was thinking about Egypt, and he was wanting to compose music, and sort of Egyptian type melodies began to come through him. And he could put his mind in a certain way, and that sort of information or inspiration would come to him. And so this is true for many things. If we're angry, we're going to that sort of information. If we're, let's say, jealous, we might have a very unwholesome inspiration. So whatever but if we think of it the other way, think of it, if we want to be guided to something higher, to do something right, we have to draw according to the question that we put out. We want to, if we put ourselves into a state of grace, if we put ourselves into a state of bliss, joy, even happiness, if we come down from those states, calm, peaceful, we're going to draw inspiration like that. That's going to be in that way. So this is, the higher we can uplift ourselves, the clearer and the more beneficial, long-term beneficial results will be. Now, if we're in a state of divine, purely divine state, which is the state of the masters, the action that we put out does not accrue karma back. A true master doesn't create karma. They act, and action does have karma. There is karma, but the karma does not accrue because there is no ego there. Karma accrues to the ego, and to the degree that we keep the ego, you might say, it's attractive, things stick to us. But when there's no ego there, the karma, which is created, all action creates karma, accrues to the world at large. And it's beneficial karma, because there's only beneficial action through a guru. So the karma accrues to everybody, or the disciples, or the world at large. So there's no karma there. But when we act from ego, we accrue karma appropriate to that state of mind. So we want to be able to, receive pure guidance, we have to put ourselves in that pure state of mind, and we'll draw that. So don't make decisions in life. When you do, whatever the decision is, look at the state of mind that you're in when you're making that decision, especially things that are important. And you want to make that decision when you're in an uplifted state of mind. Now, oftentimes, yes.
There was one lady who came out. She did not eat anything.
Yes.
Then I think somebody told her, you eat so much, don't eat. And then she stopped eating.
You have to speak to that, or else nobody will hear
There was one lady who did not eat any food, and she made a decision in anger, as per my knowledge. So, and it, I saw Guruji sitting next to her, and she never ate any food at all. But how come it was success? Like she said, I will not eat anything at all.
I can't answer that because
Sorry, when that happened.
I don't
She
know
was a
the
young
story well
child.
enough to be able to comment on it, so I can't answer.
Do you know?
No, I don't.
Giribala story.
Oh, it's Giribala. Oh, Giribala. Well, of course, that was, she was also a great soul. What she said outwardly doesn't necessarily, we don't know her state of mind. There's a child, and then there's a child. There's a childish versus an incarnated saint. So, that's it. I mean, it's like Shankara getting grabbed by the crocodile, and he says, if you don't let me go, or when he wanted to leave home, children, can be very dramatic that way. But one child doesn't have the power that the other one does, and so but I don't know the story well enough to be able to comment. What was that going?
State of mind in which we make decisions.
Yes. Here's something that when we're trying to follow divine will, we're trying to follow good guidance. Something that I think all of us, we want to say, yes, I'm going to follow that guidance. I ask sometimes when I'm wondering, what should I do? Should I do this or should I do that? I ask other people, and people will advise me, or even if I don't ask, people will give me advice. And sometimes I accept it, sometimes I don't accept it. But what I've learned over the years is, and Swami sometimes when he was alive, he would suggest things to me, and I always tried to do exactly what he wanted me to do. But sometimes I didn't understand it, or I didn't really understand what was being asked of me. Maybe that's also our suggestions. And I found what I would do is I tried to develop the habit of when things would come into my life, I would not reject them. I wasn't able always to accept them. So guidance comes into your life, and you don't understand it. It doesn't mean that you have to accept it if you don't completely understand it. Now, it may be, if the Guru is talking to you, maybe it is you should just do it that way. But my nature was such that, because I tend to be mental, I couldn't always accept it. Now, I wish I could have, but I couldn't. That was just the way it is. I mean, I just couldn't do it. But I did develop this. I said, I will not reject it. I will not reject it. And I think that might be a good place to start, is to just stop the tendency of the mind when something comes that you don't understand, it's beyond your ability to act on even. Although it might be good, maybe, but you're not sure. Just don't say no. And you'll find that's a good starting point. Just don't say no. Doesn't mean you have to say yes yet. But if you just put it on hold. Now, for example, I learned this, I think, probably from my first days of coming across the autobiography of a yogi and these teachings in Yogananda. I read that book, and it was too far beyond my experience. I didn't accept it. I admired it. I felt reverence for the author, Yoganandaji, but it was too much beyond my experience to be able to say, yes, I believe this. But I didn't reject it either. I said, well, maybe it's true. It gave me some hope, but maybe it's true. And I just put it aside for the moment. And I said, I will experiment and I will see. Let me understand a little bit better. And as time goes by, I'll then be able to say yes to this. But in the meantime, I'm not going to say no. And I found as time goes by, I slowly have begun to understand a little better, and a little better, and a little better. And it's the same thing. I met Swami Kriyananda, and he would suggest things, and I would say, no, that's not, I don't think so. That doesn't, I don't think so. That's not a good idea. But I wouldn't say that, of course, but my mind was saying that. But that was, again, by that time I had learned. I said, well, I don't think it's a good idea, but I wish I could say yes to and just fully embrace this, because some people seem to have that ability. I didn't. And, but I'd say, I won't reject it, and I'll just keep trying. And little by little, okay, a slow learner, and we all learn at our own pace, and then I began to accept, okay, that I can do that. And I had to eat my meal slowly, and came to it. So I think if I could give a piece of advice, do that. Is don't overcome the no-saying habit in life, which is just to reject things. And I'm speaking here of the spiritual life, but this is a habit that extends out into life in general, because there's a tend to block. And if we block the flow of inspiration, the flow of grace, does not flow. But if we can say yes, then of course it will flow. And if we can't do either, we get somewhere in the middle, we at least allow time and we keep trying. And I think this is a more practical approach if you find yourself like me, somewhat in the middle, and you're open to being shown. And eventually, your experience will guide you. And if it's something, because I came to the realization or the assumption that if something is true, in the end, truth wins. And if it's true, it will prove itself. I have to uplift myself. My consciousness has to be raised so that I can understand something on a higher level. And I've often found that this is the principle that is at play. If you read the autobiography, you don't understand all of those, but our ability to comprehend needs to be elevated to the point where when we're at a higher state of consciousness, we're able to receive and understand the message that's being given. And this is the principle of spiritual life. We have to uplift our consciousness to be able to receive grace. We have to uplift our consciousness to be able to receive inspiration, to be able to receive bliss, to be able to receive joy. And if we can do that, then we find it's our responsibility to uplift ourselves on that level. And then the inspiration begins to come to us. It's an attunement with that. And so this is the principle of guidance. The guidance is there, but we have to be able to draw that guidance to us. Now, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to leave some time. I've done much talking, and I could keep going with talking, but I haven't given you an opportunity to ask questions. And I would like you to ask questions. And if you ask the questions, these last 15 to 20, 30 minutes, we will go in the direction that your questions ask. So, who has a question? Nobody has a question? Oh, no, you have to. You can't leave me without a question. Okay, Manchula, you've rescued us.
My question is a little bit clarification that I was wanting to ask you. Swamiji has often said that, for guidance, it's better to stick to your own path, the path that you've chosen. But for inspiration, we could, we can take inspiration from other paths or other gurus or other teachers. So it's little bit, sometimes creates confusion. Although, at the outside everything, is same, teachings are same. But it creates confusion, conflict in the mind. So how do we resolve that?
That's a good question. The example, what he's saying is I was presented with this question in a different form just not too long ago. There was a spiritual teacher was passing through Delhi, and he was from the Kriya line. He wasn't a disciple of Yogananda, or our particular line, but Yogananda's. Anyway, he had come through the Kriya line, and he seemed to be quite a good man, a wise man, and had things to say. And somebody wanted to go to his satsang, and asked me a question very similar to that, but had some reservations about it. He felt that he was being perhaps disloyal. What would I recommend? And I repeated something that Swami Kriyananda would say about that. He said, go to other saints or spiritual teachers for inspiration and blessings of inspiration. But don't go to if you're dedicated to your own path, don't go to other saints and teachers for teachings. Because you be true to your own teachings, but yet we realize that God does manifest and comes through many different channels. And so I told this to the fellow, and it was important for him because he wanted to go to this other is not just for inspiration, but the fellow said, "Oh, come, and then I will initiate you into another line of Kriya." Because you have to realize the Kriya, although there is a uniformity to the principles, there are fine details that vary from tradition to tradition. Lahiri Mahashaya had many disciples, and he taught the Kriya technique individually from one disciple to the next, often dependent upon their particular need at that moment. And so he would say this little bit to that one, this little bit to this one, this little bit to that one. And those disciples, as they had their disciples and passed on, they would teach the Kriya in the particular way that their teacher had explained it to them. And so you can see how there's little slight variations begin to come into play. Now, Yogananda, when he came, of course, his tradition came down through Sri Yukteswar. But of course, Yogananda also was a God-realized master, and he was presenting a world mission to millions of people, and so he presented it in a certain way that would suit the needs of a very large audience. But I suspect also he might give variation to an individual. So this person wanted, and so I advised that person. I says, well, go for the satsang. This fellow was giving a satsang. I says, but don't take initiation. Don't take initiation because you don't want to be a shopper, a spiritual shopper. Well, I'll try this one. Oh, that doesn't work, or it does work, and I'll try this one. Because initiation is a sacred. We're taking a vow. We're making a sacred connection. And so the fellow's response to me was this, well, it's all the same. It's all going back to the same source. And yes, you could say that true, because you could even say it all goes back to God. Every path a true path goes back to God. But that's still, that message, that divine message expresses through different channels. And so we have to be loyal, and this is the tradition, this is the ancient tradition, we're loyal to the channel through which it comes to us. So when the question is this variation right, or is that variation right? Well, it can't be asked that way. The right one is the one that has come down to you through your tradition. And it's like asking the question, is this mother better than that mother? Well, they're both mothers, and they're both probably good. but which one's yours? And you fall, and you be loyal to that one. And it's the same with that. And so in the early days of Ananda village in America, we had many, Swami had many contacts with other spiritual traditions, spiritual teachers. He had friendships. And so he would invite many different teachers to come, and they would come. And so it was good. Many of us had a chance to meet these people. But then he stopped. He did that for some years, 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4 years. But then he stopped. He said, no, I don't think, I'd rather not do that, because what he noticed, not all, but some of the teachers would come and very consciously draw people away. He said there is a phenomena among spiritual teachers, although there can be great teachers, great people, but they tend to disciple shop. They tend to, that is what they shopped for disciples. And they would forget the appropriateness of the situation. They'd be in another environment and they would be, sort of shopping. And he said that's, not all of them did that. And so, but just to be on the safe side, he said, let's, people who would go to these spiritual teachers didn't have the discrimination to be able to understand. And he saw it was not doing some people, it was harming some people spiritually to not use their discrimination. And so it was at that time he said, if you want to go and there's somebody comes, there, obviously if there's a great saint comes and you want to go darshan, that's fine. He says, but don't take initiation. and because initiation is we're making that connection. Or, as you asked it, don't go for the teachings, because the teachings come through the channel of your path rather, and there can be variations, because it is all the same on one level, but it's also particular. And so we follow our path. And this is you find in the introduction level 1 class, what is the very common question asked about Hang Sa? Well, should I say Hang Sa or should I say So Hum? And there's a response to that, which we won't go into here, but because our tradition is Hang Sa, we follow that, because that's the one that's been given to us. And there are reasons for that too, but just for simply that's our tradition, so we follow that. And then you build up magnetism with that teaching. But if we start to mix too much, we start to draw other influences in. Now, I don't mean to get esoteric or off topic, but it does raise the question. One instance of this is in our tradition of Kriya, we focus there's much emphasis on the spiritual eye. You'll hear us when we're doing classes, we speak about the spiritual eye and focusing here. Now this happens to be not unique to our path, but it is a characteristic of our tradition of yoga and of Hot Raja Yoga and of Kriya Yoga. It's specific to our tradition. Now, it's also a part of other traditions as well, but we focus on it more than others. Now, the reason is because this is the spot of enlightenment. And when you go deep into your meditation, when you're focused very deeply, a light of that chakra, which is the positive pole of this Agya chakra in the back of the head here, the medulla, will appear. And that's the spiritual eye. We've heard that, that the light, the Kutashta light here. Do we have it? Must be a picture here somewhere. It's that.
We have it inside.
Where is it?
It's in the other room. But
Oh, anyway, it's the blue. It's the star in the middle of the blue field with the gold ring around it. That is a reality that is universal. That in a deep state of stillness, this will appear at the point between the eyebrows and here in the spiritual forehead. Now, this is the point, in other words, of enlightenment. And our task is to place our attention on that star, if we can, and pass our consciousness through the star of that spiritual eye. Through the spiritual eye, whichever color you can pass it into, but ultimately into that star. In that way, we then, that's the pathway to liberation. Now, liberation is associated here with the thousand-petal lotus, the Sahasrara. Now, there is an alternate Kriya tradition that focuses on this point, not very much on this point. So, life force coming up for those of you who are Kriya bonds, life force coming up, passing through the medulla, and instead of passing it from the medulla, which is associated with the ego, this is the seat of ego, instead of passing it from the ego to the point between the eyebrows, goes up and passes it from the medulla up to the Sahasrara, which is the 6th chakra up to the 7th chakra. Now that has a very logic to it. It has a certain logic to it. But it's not, it's a very fundamental difference of coming from the ego up to liberation rather than through the point between the eyebrows. And the principle here is in order for us to attain liberation, freedom is what we were speaking of yesterday, we have to first receive enlightenment. Enlightenment comes first. They're not the same. They're not the same. Enlightenment comes first, and that's, you might say, Jivan Mukta. Beyond, we have to get beyond the ego. We have to go beyond ego. So it's God is the doer. So when we act in life, and when these things that we've spoken about, of miracles happening, or things just going right around us, there's no karma accruing. That's the state of Jivan Mukta, where it's God is the doer. We're following guidance, not the guidance of the little self, which is associated with ego, but of guidance of the divine self. And that's the state we want. But that's not the state of liberation. Liberation is the state beyond that. And we have to first go into enlightenment. Then we go up to liberation. Now, other paths, and there are strong other paths that say we should take the life force directly from the ego center up to liberation. And what Swami explained, he says, he explained quite forcefully in one of his lectures, he says, don't do that, because it can cause imbalance. And you find that people that spiritual imbalances come unless you pass through the spiritual eye. So this is why I was saying that we have people who, now if you're under, now the caveat to that, to soften the other side of the point of view, if you're under the direct supervision of a God-realized guru, that's possible to go that way. And it very likely, I suspect Lahiri Mahashaya could have taught some of his disciples that process. But Lahiri Mahashaya is God-realized master, and anything, when you're a God-realized master, that takes precedence. But for that disciple then to pass that on as private, there's private instruction and there's public instruction. And we have to understand the difference of those. As a teacher, as somebody who shares these teachings, people ask me questions all the time about should I do this or that. And I say, and I always refer back and says, well, the teachings say, Master says, Swamiji said, and I give them that advice. But then something I can see intuitively that there might be something I could add. I says, but I have found that maybe it might help you if you just do this or that, and it might be useful for you. But understand, that's personal. Now, if that person then transmits that as the personal knowledge, that's not right. So you being a teacher, you have to be able to distinguish between the public teaching and your private experience, which are sometimes appropriate to share, but individually, not publicly. And so because then, otherwise in time, you have all these, people don't understand it quite well. So you always have to keep that balance and that clarity that we pass on the teachings of the masters. And Swami was this way too. In his life, Swami was he would say conservative he was conservative in the classical sense of what conservatism means. Conserving the past. In other words, being true to the past, being true to the tradition. And so Swami was, when he would teach, he would always refer back to what did Master say? What did Master say? And if Master said it, and he would say, Master too would publicly say things, and he would privately say things. And he said, if he said something publicly, it was meant for everybody. But if he said something privately, it was not necessarily meant for everybody. And so he said, he said, many disciples make that mistake, is they repeat something as public knowledge, which actually was private knowledge, and then that will lead to eventuality, confusion. But Swami was very conservative. He would always go back to what did Master say publicly as public knowledge. But then he did say things privately, but he would not use that as his public statement so much. So anyway, that's a long answer to a short question. Another one?
Sometimes greed overrules us.
And the question is what to do about that?
Yes.
Sometimes greed overrules us, and that's if you have greed, your actions what are the actions that come out of greed? You're looking to serve yourself. There's always that hidden selfish motivation behind it. When there's greed is motivating your actions. I liked an answer or an example that Swami Kriyananda once gave about this, and it wasn't so much greed, but it was somewhat a little bit related. Swamiji had a fondness for beautiful things. He was in his previous lives. He's a king in a previous life, more than once. So he had and in this life he was a renunciate. But yet, as a renunciate, he still had he liked beautiful things. He liked art, for example. He liked art, and he enjoyed fine music, and sometimes if he would see an object, he would appreciate if it was nice. So if you see somebody dressed very nicely, he would appreciate that person dressing very nice, and he would say, "Oh, that looks so nice." Now, sometimes he would see something and he would say, "Oh, isn't that beautiful? I'd love to buy that." Not so much that he wanted to possess it, but it was just like he was attracted to it. So what he found a solution, because he was, in his life he wasn't, just buying things for himself wasn't appropriate, nor met what he really wanted. But so what he would do is he saw something beautiful, sometimes he would buy it, and then he'd give it to somebody. And he said this was great. He says there was a wonderful solution because he had the enjoyment. He enjoyed the acquisition of it, and then he enjoyed the ability to give it to somebody else. And he said he enjoyed it twice that way. And then he was free with it too. Like Yogananda would go into that beautiful building in New York City, the that's a beautiful building there in New York City. He walked in and he went through the building and he pretended in his mind it was his. And he just went and he enjoyed this beautiful building and he enjoyed it. And then when he walked out the door, he gave it back. And I think that ability to let it flow through you, but not hold on to it. This is a point that raises a related issue which I want to mention. Swami, sometimes we see characteristics in ourselves, and they're not flattering to us. And oftentimes what we do is we spend much energy resisting them, saying, no, 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 I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that. And it's a very traditional monastic approach to life. No, 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 no. And he said, sometimes you put so much energy resisting something that's all you're thinking about. You know, that's all you're thinking about. It's like the story he would sometimes tell about the two monks. They were walking in the forest, and they came to a rushing river, and there was a young lady there on the side of it, and she was trying to get to the other side. So they went across, but she couldn't get across. And so one of the monks, picks her up and takes her across to the other side, puts her down on the other side. They go on their way. And so anyway, they walk. A couple hours go by. The other monk who didn't pick the girl up says, why did you pick that girl up? He says, you're a monk. You shouldn't have touched her, and you shouldn't have picked her up. And that was, And the other monk says, well, gee, I picked her up for a minute or two and set her on the other side of the bank. You've been carrying her on now for 2 hours. And sometimes it's like that. And we put all of our energy that way. So Swami was saying he was not like that. He was an affirmative person. And so in that example of that is finding some way to positively let that flow through in a positive way. And if you can transmute these things and the same thing with the ego itself is trying to deny the ego. All it does sometimes is enmesh oneself into egotism. You're thinking about, I shouldn't do this, and you become over-analytical and obsessed with it. And so Swami would take the position of, if you have for example, he would say, let's say you have a predilection, you're in life, you're good at something. You have a talent. You have a talent. And some people will say, well, I should not express that talent because it will only make me proud of that, and it'll enmesh me in worldly thinking about that, and I shouldn't do that. And Swami he didn't take that point of view at all. He says, if you have a rapport or an inclination towards something that's positive, it's generally positive, not a negative thing, bank robbing or something like that, but if you have predilection towards something, he said, there's a magnetic attraction from the past. You have a past life association with that, and if you have that predilection to it, it's probably better to express that, but express it in a positive, uplifted way. So if you have a inclination toward accounting, let's say, and you say, I don't want to be in accounting, that just involves me with numbers and business and all of that. No. But it's your natural expression of perhaps from previous lives. It says, better be an accountant or banker. Be that, but do it servicefully. Raise it up to a high elevation. And because you want to be successful at what you do in life. Until you're successful, it has a hold on you. More so, being a failure at something will hold you more than being a success, because you want to come back. I didn't do it. I got to come back and do it again. And you'll keep coming back until you're good at it. And oftentimes when you're successful, you see that it didn't really give you the happiness that you were looking for, because it never does. And you say, and you let it go. But if you're a failure, you keep thinking it's going to give you that happiness until you've actually succeeded. I remember an interesting story that Swami told about one of his disciples, fellow disciples. Yogananda when he was on his tour back to India, 35, and it may have been when he was returning back to America. He was in Paris. And he went to the famous museum there, the Louvre Museum. And he looked at the art and appreciated the art. And when he came back to America, one of his disciples, this was Taramata, he said to her, I was at the Louvre and I saw one of your paintings there. And he had explained that she, in a previous lifetime, had been a well-regarded painter. Now, you probably have never heard of her, but I think it was Watteau that was a painter. And then I think Watteau was an impressionist, I think. You know, I'm looking at you, maybe you're European, maybe you know these things more than I do. Anyway, which was very well-regarded, and well-regarded enough to have that picture in the Louvre. But the interesting thing was, and what Swami explained, Paramatta had little interest in art in this lifetime. She was appreciative of it, but it was not something that was high interest of her. So you would think, well, if somebody was a very, very good artist, they are going to come back and be a very, very good artist in this lifetime. He said, no, it's not so. He says, if you're a very good artist, you reach the peak of a mountain, there's nowhere else to go. You're at the top. There's nowhere else to go. And at that point, you can put it aside. You put it aside. It's still but imagine you're climbing that mountain and you get almost to the top and you die. What are you going to come back with? You want to get to the top of that. You want to perfect your art. But then once you perfect it, say, okay, it's gone. And it's done. And so now that is not advice necessarily to go out and fulfill every desire you have, but nevertheless, it's better, as Swami's approach was, put positive energy into what you're doing. And if you're an accountant or a banker or a businessman, put energy into that and turn it into a spiritual direction. Because people have this mistaken idea that the spiritual path and the worldly life are two different things, and they're not. They're not. There's one life that we live. All of us have to do something. All of us need to work. As Yogananda was saying in that little piece I played yesterday, all of us need to work, but more than work, we need to serve. So the goal is to turn our work into service. And then we're free of it. We're free of it. We let it go. So greed is like that. Is greed is that desire, that accumulation of more than attachment. It's that attachment. And but yet, if we can find a way to perhaps share, accumulate for what purpose? For I, for this little self. But if we can accumulate for something larger than myself, to allow it to flow through to others, then we release it in that way. Okay, one more. Prisha? You have to come a little closer. I'm not sure.
No, you can.
Yeah, you can.
So my question is, and I never really sat and worried about it or thought about it too much, but since this is a retreat on guidance and insight, I just happen to think that in many of the mostly Christian groups where people are in communities and focus on renunciation, they have a tradition which is called spiritual direction. They come maybe weekly or every so often to somebody who is in a leadership position, somebody wise in the group. And it is expected that they will say, here are things that are going on, problems or things that are going well. And we don't do this, and we sort of turn people loose. That is, just once we're in Ananda, if things arise, I guess, we will be spoken with if we get ourselves into trouble, but it isn't like, in a way that we can develop how we would proceed based on things that we're working on and ideals of the group. So I wondered, has this question ever come up before? Like maybe we might.
That's a good observation. Actually, it's not 100% true. But because if you remember, Swami would often have some of his satsangs, he would invite questions and discussion, and in smaller groups, that works better in smaller groups than in large groups. So it was not totally absent, but I do also think that our tradition is Swami was always very gentle. It's our tradition in that he was very gentle, very kind, and he would often say that he never taught, he only shared. And he would share something in the manner that if you choose to accept and take from this platter, you're more than welcome, and if you wish not to, then that was welcome. He always respected, from my observation, and certainly with me, he always respected another person's free will and his ability to make his own choices, even if those choices were sometimes not the best. He would always be respectful. Now, the exception sometimes would be he would interject himself. If he saw you about to step off the cliff, it would be his duty to mention it to you, or maybe even to grab you a little bit. But he tended to be very gentle in that way. But I think your observation is good. We could discuss, and people have the opportunity to accept or not accept, and that's our tradition, is to give people the free choice to make their choices on their own. Some will accept and some will not, but I think we find in this world that people tend to be very self-willed, and it takes a mark of discrimination when a person is open enough to actually receive advice. I know that's been my history. It took a long time for me to actually be able to be sensitive enough to hear somebody when they were trying to tell me something, and I think many people share that trait with me. But I think it's a good suggestion. I don't think there's any reason we can't do that. Want to give it a try sometime? We can give it a try. Let's give it a try. Actually, Tuesday night, we're having a satsang Tuesday night. Why don't we have a discussion Tuesday night, and let's just see, and we can all just talk about things like that. It's a good. I like that. I've hit the 4 on the clock over there in Narayana, so I'm going to stop. But anyway, I appreciate all of you participating with us this weekend. When we come together like this, and when we have a chance to speak, it's a joy for those of us who present to be able to do that when we have an audience who is responsive and wants to participate and hear also. And we find that a certain joy comes, which I hope you felt also, a joy comes through all of us as we participate together in a discussion like this. And so it's been my pleasure, particularly coming back to Pune, to be able to jump in like this and have a wonderful group of people to share this topic, which is a very important one. So I hope you take some of these thoughts home with you. Guidance, how can we be guided? And we're all going to be guided by something. Just it's not that we're not receiving guidance. We are receiving guidance. The question might be, what is guiding us? What is guiding us? Is it our habits, our predilections, our desires? I think we want guidance that's attuned to something higher than that. And we want it to be guided by the divine. So our responsibility is to experience the divine in our own life and become familiar with God, with the Guru, with the blessings. And then when we become familiar, then the guidance will come through that channel. So if you have a daily practice of meditation, deepen it. If you don't have a daily practice of meditation, start. And you'll find that your life will be guided as you begin to feel peace, as you begin to feel joy. These will begin to be your guides. And it will lead you step by step to deeper and deeper realizations. And that guidance will begin to clarify. And suddenly, life begins to work in harmony with you. Just try it. That's what I would suggest. Don't take my word for it. Try it yourself and see. You'll see that this is true. So many blessings to all of you. Thank you so much for coming this week.